The break. My name is Ariadna Condezo, Trinidad, and I'm an international student from Lima, Peru. I'm studying International Relations, Latin American Studies, and Peace and Justice Studies, and I'm also one of the student organizers for this conference. Before we proceed, I want to extend our deepest gratitude to the Institute for Global Leadership, the Human Rights Foundation, and the Tisch College for making this event possible. And a special acknowledgement goes to everybody working behind the scenes and our remarkable student organizers whose commitment has been the backbone of this event. Over the past 2 days, we have confronted some of the most urgent questions of our time. We have embarked on a profound exploration of democracy's challenges. We have examined the foundation of democratic systems. We have heard the powerful testimonies from fellows who have risked their freedoms, their safety, and their very own lives to stand against authoritarianism. From Nicaragua to Iraq, from Belarus to Tibet, reminding us that the fight for democracy demands our solidarity, our action, and our steadfast commitment to justice. Today, as we begin our final discussions, we will examine on economic security and access to basic needs, how they shape people's rights, aim and support for democracy, to the politics of punishment, analyzing how legal systems function across different political regimes. This conference not only aims to be a space for discussion, but also a call for action. As we listen to our distinguished speakers today, I encourage you to consider not just what we can learn, but what we can do. How will we take these conversations beyond this room? How will we translate ideas into action and reflection into impact? Democracy's future will be shaped by those who dare to stand up, speak up, and push forward. But first, we turn our attention to a crucial question. What is the future of democracy in a world where its very foundations are being tested? Around the world, we see democratic systems facing growing pressure, threatened by authoritarian influence, political instability, and the erosion of optimism. The very institutions meant to protect democracy are being undermined. In many places, democracy is not collapsing overnight, it is being gradually dismantled. To help us understand where democracy goes from here, we are honored to welcome a leader who has not only defended democracy, but has actively worked to strengthen it in both within his own country and on the world stage. Carlos Alvarado Quesada served as the 48th President of Costa Rica from 2018 to 2022. He is a remarkable advocate for climate action, human rights, and multilateral collaboration. Under his leadership, Mr. Alvarado championed transformative initiatives to address global challenges. For instance, Costa Rica launched its national decarbonization plan, with the goal to shift net zero emissions by 2050, one of the first national plans inspired by the Paris Agreement. Its government, alongside France and the United Kingdom, also played a pivotal role in establishing the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, a groundbreaking alliance that today includes over 100 nations committing to environmental preservation. But his commitment to democracy went beyond climate action. Mr. Alvarado was at the forefront of global health equity, partnering with the World Health Organization to launch the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool to facilitate faster, equitable, and affordable access to COVID-19 health products for people in all countries. He also strengthened Costa Rica's place in the global economic and diplomatic arena, guiding the countries to become the first Central American nation to join the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. In 2022, the National Geographic Society honored him with the Planetary Leadership Award for his exceptional dedication to ocean conservation. In 2019, he received the United Nations Environment Forum's Champion of the Earth Award for policy leadership, reflecting Costa Rica's environmental policies. That same year, Time magazine named him among the 100 emerging global leaders who are shaping the future and defining the next generation of leadership, underscoring his role in defining a new era of impactful, responsible leadership. Most recently, he served as the Master of Ceremonies for the Climate Mobility Youth Day at COP29 last November, and has been actively involved with the United Nations Convention to combat desertification, serving on the advisory committee for COP16, which took place in Saudi Arabia this past December. Furthermore, his recent appointment to the United Nations Committee for Development Policy underscores his continued influence in global governance, where he works alongside international experts to abide on key development strategies. Before assuming the presidency of Costa Rica, Mr. Alvarado held the role of Minister of Human Development and Social Inclusion, and served as Executive President of the Joint Social Welfare Institute, championing policies to improve social equity. Following this, he led as Minister of Labor and Social Security, focusing on labor rights and economic inclusivity. President Alvarado academic background is equally distinguished. He earned a bachelor's degree in journalism and a master's degree in political science from the University of Costa Rica, followed by a master's degree in development studies at Success University. Currently, Mr. Alvarado brings his diplomatic expertise to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy as a professor of practice in diplomacy, an executive education keynote, and a senior fellow at the Edward R. Murrow Center for a Digital World. Please join me in welcoming former President Carlos Alvarado Quesada to deliver his keynote address on the future of democracy.
Thank you very much, Ariadna, and thank you all. And I want to first, thanks for the invitation to address you this morning. Also, congratulations to all the organizers and that made this symposium possible. To say that it's a timely topic, it's an understatement, I believe. I was just thinking that in other contexts, years back, if we were to discuss democracy on the brink, we'll see it as something business as usual. I don't know if you have had that conversation either with a relative, somebody on the street, and they will say, I don't believe in the system. I don't believe democracy works. It's not giving anything to me. I believe we need something else. And then some of those conversations stop them. And some either argue, well, perhaps we need somebody strong that comes and fix all of this. And I've been in plenty of those conversations. I believe now we're in a moment that those kinds of elements we see are more evident. Democracy, it's like health, especially for the younger ones. We think of our own health, especially when we start to lose it. We usually don't think of our own health. And I can tell you that because a couple of years back I was really good, my sight was really good. I could see from really far, and now I just start noticing I can't anymore. I actually, last week I was in New York City in the UN, in the Committee for Development Policy, and I took the wrong train because I deceived myself into thinking E was D. But you see, we don't think of our own health until it starts to, until we see its fragility. Similarly happens with democracy. Democracy sometimes is defined broadly in its minimum to elections. So that's what some people, that's their connection to democracy. I vote every 5 years. That's democracy for me. For others, if you go a little bit further, no, it's not only about that. This has to do with checks and balances in a system. And then you have another concept that gives more depth to it, but also alienates many people that will ask, what are checks and balances? Not necessarily all of the people get to that criteria. So I'm going to offer 3 dimensions that I believe are worth thinking about when we discuss democracy. And if these add value to the symposium and to your own personal journeys, I believe that will be a success. 3 concepts that I do think are worth considering, worth thinking about when we discuss democracy. Going back to that conversation, to the point when people say, I don't believe the system is working, the question is, what will work then? And I think that's something we constantly need to put out there. Then what will work instead of democracy? Challenge that notion. The first topic I want to talk about from the perspective of power, but it can also be applied to citizenship, to any citizen. The exercise of being a citizen is the self-restraint in power. That's something we don't talk about often from the perspective of power. What do I mean by that? When I was in office, I was a little bit younger than now, and my counterpart in the judiciary, the president of the magistrados in our case, was an elder judge. And we will have conversations, and he will always underline the importance of self-restraint in power. At the beginning, I did not really pay attention to what the meaning of that was, because at the beginning I wanted to do lots of things, and I wanted to exercise power, to make things happen quickly. But then, with time, I realized that, to some extent, when you go to the limits of the power you have been given by the people through the vote, because that's something we need to remember a lot. Power is not exercised in a personal capacity. You're invested in a power through an agreement, most times called a constitution, written by a broad group of people and agreed. And that same constitution says that through an election or through a procedure, whoever gets invested in that power receives that power as a delegation. It's delegated on that person. And also, when he or she appoints somebody, it's a derivative of that power. So the power from the people through the constitution and an election to invest somebody and then even to appoint others to exercise it. I remember going back to my conversations with the Chief Justice in Costa Rica, that would be the equivalent about self-restraint. We have very cordial but very tough arguments, particularly on topics like budget, or where were the limits of the action of the judiciary and our own limits. Very respectfully, but very heated debates. So I remember one time there was a particular ruling of the courts mandating an investigation on the executive that required going into the offices of the executive to find potential evidence. In being confronted on that, I knew that I had the power to stop it. Not even legally, with the police, who was under my, let's say, but what would happen then if I would have done that? We will have had an institutional and constitutional crisis. But not only that, democracy is also about the time interplay of actions. We tend to think of democracy of a game of the now only. But whatever we do in present has consequences in the future, even through generations. We can either erode the system by our actions or strengthen it. On that particular moment, I decided it was not that, I knew that that's the procedure. So we allowed them, we facilitated for them to go in and take whatever computers or whatever they want, to follow the due procedure. Obviously that had great impacts in the communication, you know how this works. But that self-restraint protects the democracy. And that applies to any branch of government or to any level. Why? Because whether it's when justices take their power further or start to use their power because they will have their own government for certain privileges, or congressmen and women use their power to go to other privilege, that starts to undermine the system in front of them. And the people say, see, it doesn't work, but for them, it does work. Self-restraint is an important part of protecting democracy. Understanding that that power is delegated. And that we have to be very careful, very responsible with what we do with it. Because it's not only about the now, it's about the consequence of it. And that sounds very distant, on the other hand, to community, to empowerment of people, to to ownership. Perhaps that's the other dimension that's lacking when we talk about democracy, where people feel, because it's more a feeling than a thought. Feel it's not working. It's because chances are there's not an ownership or a practice in a community where the connections of actions can be reflected on reality. And that's a very difficult thing to make it visual. But I do believe there is one of the keys to preserving and exercising democracy. How people, through their own participation, action, empowerment, can see the change happen and why it is necessary and why it is important. I took always a saying from the climate book, but I think it's very valid. That it says that every adaptation is local. In climate change, when you do certain interventions to adapt to what's happening with climate change, either infrastructure because the sea level rise is rising, either planting more trees because the temperatures in cities is going up. Whatever intervention that happens on neighborhoods, on blocks, on communities, every adaptation is local. Therefore, it's very concrete when you do interventions to transform the people's lives and livelihoods. But we tend to think that democracy doesn't necessarily happen locally. We tend to think about it that happens either on a capital, or in the UN, or in a COP, even in the city hall, or a city council, but not many people go there because they say it doesn't matter. We need to make that connection visible because through community and through empowerment, and when people realize that their actions, their activity, their behavior transforms dramatically their realities for them, for the neighbors, for the children, their community, then it's another different mindset, another different thing. It's not only this democracy that we talk as a concept comes to life as a practice. I don't think about democracy, I live democracy, I experience democracy. And when you engage with others, you then start to also see that we have different points of view, and that we need to engage with others, and commit, and find understanding. And also understand, sometimes agree to disagree, but in a very civil way. We need to bring back the practice of democracy to the local. Perhaps it's not every adaptation is local, but every democracy has to be local. That's it. And I think what I've seen in the past years in the Fish College is one of the great practices there is in House University on that regard, of thinking about the life of how citizens should take an active role into transforming that. We have this sense of grandeur, and I've seen it, experienced it. You know, that being on the halls of the UN, being on the COPs, if that doesn't connect with community, we're failing. Epistemologically, we have this sense of center, you know, the center and the periphery sometimes. I think we need to challenge that. Center is wherever meaning is. And if we devote meaning to community, then that is center. And we can transform it. And then from that understanding, national government or multilateral institutions, instead of trying to give all size fit for solutions created for community, what they should be doing is empowering, enabling to come up with their own solutions, exercising their own agency. Sometimes we're stripping away agency from community by trying to define what the solutions are. That's not the role there. The role is enable, empower, provide the tools so people can find their own solutions. How many times in the development world we've seen that, oh, that worked in this place, let's scale up that solution. And then we wonder, oh, it's so weird, it didn't work around the world. Why? Well, we were out there and said, this is what you have to do. exercising the community, the local democracy. We need to change our thinking. But then, from self-restraining power in the different levels, we need to exercise the power of the community and transform how we think about it. Especially starting with politicians in higher levels. It's just different centers of importance. We should not fall into that epistemological trap of thinking one is more important than the other. They're just different and interdependent. My third point, also going with words and concepts, I think we blame a lot of things on the wrong words. We say democracy is not working. The system is not. In the UN, multilateralism is not working. By the way, I encourage everybody not to use the word multilateralism. That's from the international relations sphere. Outside that, nobody cares or understands what it is. Until you say, no, a system rule on base in international law. People say, oh no, that makes sense, to protect that, to preserve that. We blame it on the wrong words. Let's go to that, multilateralism. The system is not working. Is it the system that's not working? At the end of the day, the system is the reflection of the will of its participants. It's not necessarily the system that's blocking it. Using that language appears that it's something out there preventing it from happening. The system works through its actors. Similar sometimes in democracy. But I do believe that we sometimes say democracy is not working. And we put all the blame on that. But what about other things about that system? Because people say, no, the democracy is not working. I mean, you see all those people doing well. And I'm minimum wage, or I have a hard time studying, or I have a hard time finding housing. Or is that democracy always fault? Or there are other considerations? There are components of greed that we have encouraged because of the system, because the system needs to work. Sometimes for that, the rules work. We need to bring into our attention that the pressures on democracy might come as well from the system of capitalism, which I'm not saying we need to turn down itself, but we need to see what their impact is being on the endorsement that people give to the system. And perhaps to find counterbalances to its effects, to help people, to understand that we are better off in that community exercise, whether it's a neighborhood, whether it's a region, whether it's the whole planet, chances are we're better off if those that surround us are also better off. That doesn't seem logical in the first place for many. Perhaps because we're not exercising that sense of community. I do believe we need to challenge also, if we say democracy is not working, are we really talking only about democracy? Or is it something else? Yes, there are things, and I experienced it firsthand, within the system that do not work. Bureaucracy for once. Systems. Sometimes you feel you're not fighting to do well. Sometimes you feel you're fighting bureaucracy in order to make things happen. But we need to bring that to conscience also, to make things more efficient, to make them work. Our current challenge, I believe one of the most pressing ones, is demonstrate the benefit of democracy, the protections, and also the potential to do good broadly to the people. And not in a way that it's the best system ever. No, as it's saying, if I think about those options, yes, it's still better than the other option. I will always stick with democracy at the end, because that's also a very current discussion, and people say, you see, countries that are not democratic are better off economically, and they advance really fast. Well, sometimes it's because if you want to build a highway or a building, you don't need to ask those neighbors. You just do it and relocate people. No questions asked, no petitions, no capacity to put a legal resource over. We need to see that other route. I am, even though what we see, I am hopeful. Because I put that hope not on chance, not on external factors, but I put that hope on the will of people. People that's willing to engage, people that's willing to work. There's a recent study that demonstrates that. Confronted to two impactful measures, one positive and one negative, nowadays we have a high capacity to recall the negative and a high capacity to forget the positive impacts. Very asymmetrical. When I speak in the climate world, we talk about the 30 by 30, the protection of 30% of the ocean and 30% of the land achieved by 2030, which actually, it's committed. In 2019 it was launched, in 2022 was endorsed, even though everybody thought it was impossible. 190 countries agreed to that, and that's going to give the planet a chance in its nature to survive. Most people don't know that happened, and that it's ongoing. But that also demonstrates that good change is possible if people engage, if people root their hope in action. Democracy, it's also perseverance. When Nelson Mandela addressed for the last time the parliament in South Africa, finishing his term as president, his first and only term, he ended saying very wisely and conscious of his own history as a country and personal history, he ended up by saying, and the long walk continues. Democracy is not something that happens one day. So, as life and as its health, it's something that needs reward, constant nourishing, perseverance, constant fighting for it. So even in the bleakest of moments, if we give up, give it up. Perseverance is perhaps one of the strongest values we need to exercise today. And hope, but hope rooted in action. Also, thank to you all to participate in this, because this